Welcome back to the Spector Creative channel. I'm your host, Scott Toy Guru Neitlich, and today we're talking about form factors. All right, what is that? Well, let's say there's a new up-and-coming property, maybe an unknown property that you want to license. And, well, when you approach the IP owner, they'll say, okay, well, what do you want to license our property on? And it could be lots of things, lots of categories, such as shirts. Shirts and what are called apparel, meaning hats, socks, underoos, winter jackets, the whole 9 yards. That's the apparel category. Another overarching license category is salty snacks. So if you happen to own a salty snack company and you're not like obese and from eating all of your product, you can license it. Well, on this channel, we tend to talk about toys a lot. Now, toys is a category for licensing. So if you approached an IP holder, in this case, Star Wars, and said, hey, I want to make action figures, I want to make toys. Well, they might even say, within the toy category, what form factors do you want to license? So that's where we get into what these are. So this is how you break up an overall category. So you have 12-inch figures, you have 3 3/4 figures. These could be considered separate licenses. Another one would be bobbleheads that Funko has with oversized heads and sort of what are called deformed or stretched out features. Lego, another category. These aren't considered action figures, but construction. So because you have to put this figure together, it's not actually an action figure. Whereas this would be a non-articulated slug figure. Again, a different category. Or in this case, here we have a fabric figure. Yet another category within the overall toy category, I should say form factor within the toy category. So again, full plush, another category of form factor within the overall toy category. I keep mixing those up. I should probably stick with one, so I'm trying to explain it. So here we have Pez, another way that the same character, Greedo here, a form factor, a tiki. All of these are different form factors within the overall toy category. Heck, if you want to make Greedo reimagined as a Hot Wheels car, apparently that license is available as well. All right, so with so many different form factors available, and even within one form factor, such as 3 3/4, there are different executions. Executions with soft goods, executions with limited articulation. What's really interesting is that certain toys, especially vintage toys, have become categories within categories. So you might have a category like action figures, and within that category would be 5 points of articulation, 3 3/4 action figures. So this is something that Reaction has done. This is a toy line that's actually been done by a few toy companies. Super 7, Funko, they've dipped a little bit. Heck, even Hasbro is doing these at retail with Marvel right now. So essentially, what was a straight-up action figure form factor within the toy category back in the 1970s has now become an actual form factor, meaning 5 points of articulation, but minimalistic sculpting and deco. So this form factor differs from, say, something like a Star Wars vintage series, which is highly articulated with lots of deco. And Funko and Super 7, the Reaction line, has really expanded to a huge number of licenses because it's a very inexpensive form factor and it translates very well and easily. Plus, you don't need likeness rights when you're dealing with something like this because of the minimal deco. You're just doing eyes and mouths. Heck, you could even now get Star Trek in a Star Wars form factor. How crazy is that? All right, so let's talk about another example. He-Man, right? You would think He-Man is an action figure, but this shape, this particular execution of an action figure within the figure category has become a form factor into itself. Case in point, the Funko Primal Age figures that were sold at Target a few years ago. So these were figures that were based, if you will, on the hunched, muscular stance of a He-Man toy from the 80s. I mean, heck, Primal Age even did castles and ride-on beasts, which definitely followed suit to the total rollout of SKUs. And Funko was able to take this form factor, the hunched-over muscular body, and apply it to a lot of different IP. So in this case here, you have Thundercats reimagined as the muscular form factor that was started with Masters of the Universe. All right, so the question is then, how do companies do this, and can't the original company, go after them? I mean, here we have Thundercats now reimagined as a Star Wars figure. So we're taking the same IP and taking it from its original action figure and doing different executions. All right. So what's to stop companies for suing the heck out of other toy companies for more or less copying their toys and just slapping a different head on it? Well, it all came to a head, no pun intended, when Remco and Mattel went to court in the 1980s. Remco had been making an action figure line based off DC's Warlord line. They had characters like Hercules and Warlord, and you can't forget our favorite, Mikola. Ricola! Well, needless to say, when Mattel saw these figures, yes, there was a lawsuit. And thanks to the wonder of the internet, everything about this lawsuit's available for us to digest and review. So what happened? Well, basically Mattel lost. They lost for a couple of reasons. One was they were found that there was no impending harm to Mattel from these figures. But what they also found in the lawsuit was that muscular stance that He-Man figures are known for, like if you saw a silhouette of a He-Man figure, well, the judge, and actually several judges, because Mattel appealed this decision multiple times, and each time the judge found in favor of Remco, basically this muscular stance is a standard wrestling stance, and Mattel can't own it. Remco even went back and got photographs going all the way back to the early 1800s, showing that, yes, you can't just say this muscular stance can only be interpreted in one toy line. In fact, Remco actually brought out art going back thousands of years to court and showing that, yes, this sort of muscular charging look is not something even modern. This is a standard warrior, wrestler, fighter stance, and because of that, any toy company that wanted to make figures in this type of stance was allowed to. You can't own a stance. You can own a face, you can own a costume, if you will. Like, no one can just make a Spider-Man or Batman toy without paying Marvel or DC. But as far as how you want that character to stand, flex, punch, etc. All right, so form factors, though, are not always a two-way street. You can't just say, oh, hey, that toy was successful, I'm going to remake my toy based on that one. So, here you have Skeletor reimagined in the 3 3/4, 5 points of articulation, minimal deco form factor that Star Wars made famous in the 80s. And reimagining the Masters of the Universe He-Man brand in the reaction line of what He-Man could have looked like had it been made in the Star Wars line look, if you will. But that Star Wars line look is not copyrightable because it's just a standard figure. You can't copyright a thin character with minimal deco. It's just too sort of big picture, if you will. And hey, what's to stop a company then doing the opposite and taking, Star Wars figures and putting them out as muscular He-Man figures? They actually kind of did this with Power of the Force Wave 1. I mean, maybe not this muscular, but why doesn't a company do this? These actually look really badass. These are custom figures. I can't custom make them the way other people can, but maybe it's not a bad idea. Maybe Star Wars should be muscular with He-Man figures. Maybe kids would get into that. I don't know. All right, so what's the other aspect of this? When you have a generic body, can you then just use that for more or less any character you want, since there's no way to trademark a generic fighting body? Well, the answer is no. When a body is made for a specific line, so in this case, DC or Marvel, well, you can make as many Marvel or DC characters as you want using the same body. But that body is then owned by the IP owner, meaning Marvel or DC. So that's why you don't see, for example, the Superman Batman body being used on WWE toys, or likewise the Marvel figures being used on Star Wars. Another interesting example is the back-in-action figures Mattel is putting out, where they're taking their old IP, like Major Matt Mason and Pulsar, and putting them out in what would be the Secret Wars form factor, meaning stretched out legs, long arms, 5 points of articulation. They even use Secret Wars on the Outer Shipper, using the name of the old Mattel Marvel line from the 80s as the name of this form factor. I'm not sure how that exactly works. Maybe Mattel still owns the word Secret Wars. I don't know if you can own that. Those words are generic. But the point is, this is another example of taking an older toy's form factor and applying it to other brands. All right, I hope this video clarified the difference between category licensing, like toys, and form factor licensing, which is not as controllable. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comments below, and thanks so much for sharing this video with others.